Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Why Log4j Does Not Scare Me. My name is Carol Auth of SANS. Today's featured speaker is Kevin Fiskus, SANS Principal Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Kevin.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Carol. And welcome, everyone. My name is, as Carol mentioned, my name is Kevin Fiskus. I'm a principal instructor with the SANS Institute. I primarily, with SANS, I primarily teach the Security 504 hacker techniques, exploits, and incident handling, and the Security 560 class, which is network penetration testing and ethical hacking. I'm also the lead author for an upcoming SANS class, Security 550, cyber deception, attack detection, disruption, and active defense. So again, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking with you guys a little bit about this whole deal with Log4j or Log4Shell, or however you want to look at it, whether you want to look at the involved technology or whether you want to look at the name of the vulnerability, because it seems like these days we have to give all of our vulnerabilities a name and a logo and all that kind of fun stuff. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why Log4Shell, the Log4j vulnerability, doesn't really bother me all that much. Now, I'm not in any way saying this is not a serious vulnerability, but what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about, well, what the vulnerability is for those of you who may not have an understanding of exactly kind of what's going on with this thing, why it's such a big deal, and then why it doesn't really bother me all that much. And at the end of this, time permitting, I'll do a little bit of some demonstration type stuff. So with no further ado, let's just go jump into this whole issue of Log4Shell. So let's start off with this concept of Log4j, which is basically a Java-based logging framework, and it is integrated into, well, kind of everything, right? So many different things that utilize Java. They want to be able to log what's going on, so they implement Log4j. And that's the kind of core of the problem, kind of starting with, I mean, we'll talk about the vulnerability in just a little bit, but the fact that it's integrated into so many different technologies, it's a huge, huge, huge big deal. The Log4j vulnerability has actually been around since 2013. That said, it was only publicly disclosed on December 9th of last year. So there was a very long period of time where this vulnerability existed, and either nobody knew about it, or if people did know about it, they really kept it quiet, right? They, whether it's maybe some bad guy attacker groups that were using it unbeknownst to us or something like that, but it really only became a big deal sort of the beginning of last month. If you're familiar with the common vulnerability scoring system, this particular vulnerability received a CVSS severity rating of 10 out of 10. So it is a serious big deal. If you look at some of the like just, do a Google search on it and look at kind of the impacts and what the big deal was. This thing, when it came out, it was realized that it affected kind of everybody and everything. So big name companies, AWS, Cloudflare, iCloud, Minecraft, Steam, a lot of these kind of big, widely used technologies or platforms were affected by this Log4Shell vulnerability. It has been described as the largest vulnerability ever, affecting as much as 93% of cloud environments. So it is a big deal. And please do not misunderstand me. When I say I'm not really worried about Log4Shell, I'll understand what that means, or I'll explain what that means shortly. But I don't want you to just take the title of this webinar and dismiss Log4Shell. It is a serious big deal. So let's talk a little bit about what it is. So the net effect is, within Log4Shell, you have the ability to reference external sources, including allowing you trying to query things from external sources like LDAP directories. And you're going to do this using this Java naming and directory interface, or JNDI, with a specific syntax. You're going to get this, $, open squiggly brackets, JNDI, and then you're going to specify a resource. Now, that's where things get kind of ugly, because there's, at least in unpatched versions, there weren't any controls over what could be sitting at that resource, like an LDAP server. So what I, as an attacker, can do if a vulnerable version of Log4j is being used, is I can submit data into a vulnerable web application, and I can provide a JNDI link similar to kind of what you see in the middle of this slide. So when I provide that, the deal is that ldap/something.com/resource, that is typically going to be something that I, as the attacker, control or have some ability to control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some executable code on that resource. So the concept is I submit something into your web application goes over and looks up a resource on my LDAP server. And if that resource is code, it runs, but it runs on your system. So it is a remote code execution vulnerability. So again, a really big deal. Anytime you have remote code execution, it is a bit of a problem. So again, just kind of keep those things in mind. Now, when it came to mitigation, like a lot of times you end up seeing like, all right, we discovered this new vulnerability, and so here's the patch. Well, the problem is there are lots and lots of permutations of how this Log4j exploit can be implemented, right? So there's a lot of various ways to make it happen. So when the patches were originally released for Log4j, the patches corrected the most common attack vectors. In other words, the most common syntax for the attack. But then as people started looking into it, they realized, well, if you vary the syntax here, if you vary the syntax there, you can circumvent those patches, which necessitated additional patches coming up, and so on and so forth. So it was a little bit messy just by itself. And then subsequent to the original discovery of the Log4 shell vulnerability, there were a number of variants that allowed for a couple of them, remote code execution, denial of service attacks. Now, with most of those variants, the attack vector is a little bit more challenging. But the fact of the matter is that this situation isn't simply one where you just go and deploy a patch. Now, you can't just go and deploy a patch because you've got to make sure you have the right patch. You've got to address different variations. And the fact of the matter is that Java is used all over the place, including things like different embedded computing devices, any kind of built-in system. So the fact of the matter is, one of the things that made this such a bad vulnerability was that in a lot of cases, organizations don't even know they're running Log4j because they didn't install it. It was part of some other piece of technology. And, again, they don't know what's going on under the hood. So vulnerabilities can exist even if you don't know that you have those vulnerabilities. So again, when we talk about Log4j being a huge problem, there is no question. It is a big, big problem. It is bad, and it is like, it's no joke. Okay. So why am I not scared? Well, I'm not scared because I'm viewing this from a slightly different context. Now, as you can see here, we talk about Log4 shell, big vulnerability, right? What if we go back in time, though? There have been lots of big vulnerabilities. I'm not saying that all of these vulnerabilities have been the equivalent of Log4 shell, but we've had things like Eternal Blue, Heartbleed, Shell Shock, Bluekeep, Configure, Nimda, Spectre, Meltdown, SQL Slammer. Again, I just kind of went through a list of the most impactful vulnerabilities that we've had over the last X number of years. And the fact of the matter is that this list is not all inclusive. It does not include every vulnerability that has ever existed. It includes some of the big ones. And the fact of the matter is, there is one really important item that is missing from this list, and that is the next vulnerability, right? So what I want you to do in order to not be scared by Log4 shell, we need to start off with a slightly different assumption that we have, that a lot of people typically do. And that assumption is very, very simple. People are going to get in, right? The fact of the matter is, whether it's Log4 shell, whether it's some 0-day vulnerability, whether it's a user error, whether it's phishing, whatever, the fact of the matter is, we have to assume from a security paradigm, from a security program perspective, that attackers are going to get in. And if it's not Log4 shell, if it's not Eternal Blue, if it's not Heartbleed, it's going to be something else, whether it's a huge vulnerability or whether it's, a niche-y thing that just affects your environment. Now, please don't get me wrong. In no way am I saying we should stop trying to keep the bad guys out. We absolutely should be doing all of the things that we typically do to keep the bad guys out: patching, hardening, strong security architecture. All of those things are super important. I am not saying don't do them. I am saying that we have decades and decades of experience that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that we are never going to keep all of the bad guys out. It is never going to happen. So don't set that as your goal, right? Make it as hard as possible for the bad guys to get in. Make it so the bar that has to be reached is that you have to have a fairly competent, a skilled, a bad guy, something along those lines. Don't make it easy, but the bad guys are going to get in. Now, the fact of the matter, the fact that bad guys are going to get in is bad, right? I mean, that is not ideal, right? If this was our home, if we were talking about our homes and we tried this concept of, well, I'm just going to assume that people are going to invade my home, that would be terrifying, right? We don't, it's a bad thing, but it gets much, much, much worse than that. According to the 2021 Ponemon Institute Cost of a Data Breach study, which I strongly recommend everybody take a look at, it's absolutely fantastic. It talks about the average amount of time that it takes organizations in the study to detect or to identify and contain a breach. And that number is 287 days, right? That is staggering, right? It takes us the majority of a year on average to identify bad guys on our network, figure out what's going on, and then contain the mess, right? That is absolutely horrifying. And it's still, so bad guys are going to get in. And the fact of the matter is, most of us aren't going to know that they're there for an extended period of time. Now, why that is particularly bad, as information security professionals, our job is to reduce risk, right? Now, in order to do that, we have to have an understanding of what risk is. And the way that I define risk is the likelihood that a threat exploits a vulnerability causing harm. So if you kind of looked at that like it was a math equation, there are different components of that math equation. You have likelihood, you have threat, you have vulnerability, and you have harm, right? So let's look at those, right? So I can't really do a whole lot about the threats. There are some things we can do, but that's a topic for a different discussion. So the threats kind of are what they are. Now, let's talk about vulnerabilities. A lot of what most of our organizations are doing when it comes to our security programs are trying to minimize those vulnerabilities. We're trying to patch and harden and remove unnecessary technology and change defaults and apply different controls around those antivirus and IPS and all these kind of things to try to get rid of the vulnerabilities. But as I said earlier, the fact of the matter is we've got decades of experience showing us that our environments are too complicated. There's too much technology, and we have users that are involved in this entire process, which makes it kind of a foregone conclusion that somehow, some way, the bad guys are going to get in. So then we start having to look at the aspect that I want to focus on, which is harm, right? The fact that a bad guy compromises my network is not terribly interesting to me. What's interesting to me is what harm does that bad guy cause, right? If there was a perfectly benign bad guy that compromised environments, but never, ever, ever, ever did anything harmful, well, then I probably wouldn't care that much. I mean, I'd care because the bad guy got in somehow. But the fact of the matter is what I'm really concerned about is the amount of harm that the bad guys cause. Now, what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Well, according to that same Ponemon Institute cost of a data breach study, an organization that takes over 200 days to identify and contain breaches, the average cost of that breach is $4.88 million. Now, the average cost is just a placeholder. It's just a comparison, right? So $4.88 million. If organizations identify and contain those breaches in less than 200 days, that cost drops down to $3.61 million. That is a 29.7% decrease. That's a huge, huge factor. If I came up to you and said, hey, if you detect and respond to breaches more quickly, it's going to reduce the cost of your breaches by almost a third. That is huge, 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 right? That's what we're talking about right here. And by the way, those numbers that I just mentioned, this chart is also directly from that Ponemon Institute cost of a data breach. And you can see that while the differences change a little bit, in every year that they've done it, and here it goes back as far as 2015, every single year that they've done it, they've identified a direct correlation between the amount of time that it takes to detect and respond to a breach and the cost of that breach. So we detect and respond to breaches faster, and our costs are going to be lower. If it takes us longer to detect and respond to breaches, our costs are going to be higher, right? So we've seen that over a long period of time. Now, what does this have to do with Log4Shell? Well, first and foremost, when we look at our overall security programs, what are the goals of our security programs? We need to start changing our paradigm a little bit. Now, weirdly enough, nothing that I'm gonna throw out here is shocking, right? The fact of the matter is most organizations, their number one priority is let's keep the bad guys out. And then after that, we'd like to detect and respond as quickly as possible. So that's not really a substantial change. It just hasn't been effective, right? Keeping the bad guys out, patching, hardening, firewalls, antivirus, IPS, those are all great. They are all fantastic technologies and they work to a degree, but the bad guys keep finding ways to circumvent those. When we look at our detection, however, things get a little bit more complicated because when we look at a lot of our detection technology, we look at things like IDS, security, event and information management, log monitoring, even things like antivirus. Well, that could be protective as well as detective. These technologies predominantly rely on the concept of looking for evil. I'm going to look for a signature of evil activity. I'm going to look for logs that represent evil activity on my system. And the problem is that bad guys do a really phenomenal job of making evil look like, well, not evil. And the deal is they don't need to make themselves look good. They just need to make themselves look something other than whatever the detection technology is looking for. Now, there are other types of detection technologies out there. File integrity monitoring is one, user and entity behavioral analytics. Both of those technologies, they change the paradigm quite a bit. They're not trying to look for evil. They're more focusing on abnormal. So file integrity monitoring, I'm going to baseline files on my systems. And if those files change, then I want to get alerted. User and entity behavioral analytics tries to normalize the activities in a computing network. And once that normalized baseline is established, if there are deviations from normal, then we're going to go ahead and generate an alert. Now, the problem with both of these types of technologies is they're difficult, right? When you look at file integrity monitoring, what files am I going to watch? I can't watch things like log files that are always changing. So I've got to be really careful in terms of setting up my file integrity monitoring so that I'm not generating a lot of false alarms. But I've got to monitor everything. I've got to update it when I add new critical files to the system. So there are some complexities there. User and entity behavioral analytics, same problem that I have, right? The way that I always look at it, and this example is getting a little bit dated now, but imagine that you normalized your entire network in February of 2020, right? So basically almost 2 years ago, right before COVID happened. So I now normalized my entire network only to send all of my employees home to now work remotely. So all of that normal baseline is now changed. So there are some really, really, really challenging aspects to detecting bad guys on our network. I've also taken a look at a number of studies talking to security operations center personnel, so SOC personnel, the people that are, so we're talking about organizations that have dedicated security operations centers, that have people who are monitoring, that are looking for, that are dedicated to looking for issues going on. And the numbers that I've seen indicate that anywhere between 25 and 33% of all alerts generated in a security operations center are false positives. Right? That's a huge problem, because if you think about this, if you use the 25% number, what that means is if you have 4 people working in your SOC, one of them you're basically paying to do nothing because they're just weeding through those false positives. Now, obviously, that's more of a statistical thing, and it could be as bad as 1 out of 3 of your SOC personnel are basically spending their time weeding through false positives. So is there a better way? Well, the answer is yes, there is. And as I mentioned right when we kicked this thing off, that I'm the author of an upcoming class on cyber deception. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what cyber deception is. And looks like we're doing pretty well from a time perspective. So I'll have some time to go through some, maybe some brief demos and some things like that as well. So what I'm talking about is we're still going to focus on this aspect of, instead of looking for evil, let's look for abnormal. But what we're going to do is we are going to very specifically define what normal is. So what we're going to do is we are going to place resources on our network. These resources could be pretty much anything, right? It could be files on our systems or directories that nobody should be accessing, user accounts, open ports, listening services, entire computers, databases, wireless networks, entire networks. The whole point is we're going to put resources on our network that have no sort of normal, legitimate business function. And because these resources have no normal, legitimate business function, normal is defined explicitly as no interaction or no use. In other words, if I'm sitting on a network with my end user computer and my computer is listening on port 80, nobody should ever connect up to my computer on port 80. There's no reason for anybody to do that associated with legitimate traffic. So if anybody connects up to my computer on port 80, an alert gets generated and I can go investigate that. Now, the effect of this is you end up with what is in effect a high fidelity, low noise detection solution. Right? Now, I talk about high fidelity, low noise. False positives can happen, right? When a false positive happens, what that means is, let's say, for example, your security department is doing vulnerability scanning across your entire network. Well, if the vulnerability scan interacts with my deceptive resources, then I get an alert. but that alert says that you just got scanned by, or somebody interacted with you coming from IP address 1.2.3.4. So I can go look at it and go, oh, well, 1.2.3.4, it's on my network. I can go find out who has that. I can very easily and with very little effort determine whether or not this is something I need to dig into, or if it's a false positive. If it's a false positive, I just put it aside. And so it really ends up being a very simple process of determining whether or not that activity is abnormal, or whether that is just something, maybe it's abnormal, but recognizable. So that's the kind of concept that we're actually talking about here. So what I'm going to do, and you guys, I'm going to flip over here, and we're going to kind of go ahead and reload my my browser window on this. I'm going to go ahead and show you a little bit of a demonstration of how this whole thing can work. Just while I was talking, my session timed out, so I got to go ahead and open it back up again. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you a very simple scenario where what we're going to do. So I've created a tool set. Now, the concept of this tool set that I created is, so some of you may be familiar with the concept of living off the land. So living off the land is when attackers get on our systems, and instead of using like hacker tools, they use what's already built on the system. So what I wanted to do was to find out what I could do from a cyber deception perspective without using any specialized tools. I'm only using stuff that is built in. Now, I will have to say that in a couple of cases, I had to add some typical tool sets, but there's no specialized commercial or even like specialized deception tools that are used in this environment. So what I'm going to do is flip over and change my screen share. So hopefully what you guys are seeing now is a Linux box with a bunch of sort of purplish windows open for that. Now, the one I'm going to focus on right now is the top left one. I'm running a little bash shell script. All this is a set of bash shell scripts, and I've been playing around with this stuff for a few weeks. I have no guarantee that everything is going to work perfectly, because this is really a proof of concept. So fingers crossed, and we'll see what actually ends up happening here. But hopefully you'll see what the idea is. So when I go run this thing, I'm gonna go ahead and run it. Now it pops up, and the first thing that it does is it says, all right, here's your current IP addresses. Are these what you want to use? And I'm fine with this. I'm good with that. If I hit no, I could go change my IP addresses and run it, but I'm gonna hit yes. So then it's going to say, do you want to create deceptive port listeners? All right, sure. That sounds like fun. All right, let's create 2 of them just for the sake of the argument. All right, what's the port number that I want to listen to? Let's try 3389. And the other port number that I want to listen to is, let's just make it 5555. Whatever, doesn't matter. Okay, so I've now created a couple of port listeners. Do I want to add any more? No. All right, what else can we do? Do I want to enable operational services like Telnet, SSH, FTP, or whatever? Sure, let's go ahead and do something like that. Do you want to enable Telnet? Yes, I do. And it's giving me a pop-up. It's basically going to give me an inetd.conf file that I'm going to go ahead and change. I'm making sure that Telnet is not commented out. This is just a super simple file, so I'm good with that. Everything's happy camper there. Do I want to enable SSH? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to enable, I've also got FTP and SNMP, but I'm not going to enable those. Do I want to create any deceptive users? Sure, why not? Let's create a deceptive user called Kevin. Okay, what do I want Kevin's password to be? Now, this is one of those areas where from a deception perspective, you've got to make some decisions. I'm going to get stupid here and make the password. Now, in a real environment, if I was trying to do this in more of a production sense, I probably would make the password comply with my password policies, make it be a little bit hard to crack, some of those types of things. But either way, I'm still good. I'm just going to make this password for right now. Do I want to add any files associated with the user, Kevin? For the sake of this, let's just go ahead and say yes. Do you have a template file? Let's say yes. And I happen to have a file. Let me just go to, hang on, hold on. Let me go here. I'm gonna go into this Fiskus directory. And I think I've deleted my template file. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a different file, whatever. I'll just use this deception stat file. Doesn't matter. So it allows me to take a file that is like a template file, and then it's going to tell me where do you want to put this thing. So I'm going to go to home. I'm going to go to Bob, and I'm going to put it on Bob's desktop, and I'm going to call it passwords.txt, just for the sake of something, right? Doesn't really matter. So I now added it. Now, do I want to edit the file? At this point in time, I'm just going to say no for that, but I could edit it if I wanted to. Do I want to add another file? No. Do I want to add any additional users? No. We're just going to go through this one. Do I want to create a directory to monitor? I could monitor any interactions with a directory if I wanted to as well, but I'm not going to do that for just this demonstration. Do I want to start monitoring any already created directories? No, I'm not going to worry about that either. And then it allows me for creation of other types of deceptive files. I'm not going to do that. And then the next thing it's going to ask me is, do I want to create an SUID0 file? So one of the things that bad guys will often look for when they get on a Linux box is an executable file that is owned by root with the set UID bit set. So part of what this script does is it allows me to create one of those. So I'm going to go ahead and hit yes, I do. Where do I want this file to go? I'll put this one in the Kevin directory, and we're just going to call it cool shell, right? Just what the heck? It's a cool shell. And then I go in and I create. Now, what this executable that I'm creating is actually doing is literally just generating a log entry. That's all it's doing. So I have the opportunity, should I want to edit that, because it starts as a bash script, but I'm not going to worry about that either. So I've created that SUID file. I can also fire up a deceptive website. I'm not going to do that right now. We'll do some web stuff in just a little bit. So we'll hit no there. And the other thing, I can do wireless deception. I'm not going to do that either because I don't actually have an external wireless card connecting up to my computer. And then the last thing it allows me to do is, do I want to capture packets coming from this, coming from this computer? I'm not going to do that for here either. So now what we have is this environment is set up, and we've got, if you can look up at in the window, it may be kind of hard for you to see, but you can see that I have listeners created on port 3389. We got monitors set up. We've enabled Telnet and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is, here's my Windows computer. This is my host operating system, and I've got an Nmap scan scheduled to go here. So the concept, and this is just one simple scenario that this might apply to, but the concept is a bad guy has compromised my network. Right? They phished a user, they social engineered somebody, they physically gained access and plugged into an open jack, but they are on my network, and now they are looking for targets. And so in this case, we're literally just going to run a quick Nmap scan. Maybe. Come on. I don't know why that's misbehaving. Let me try this again. Okay. Oh, dang it. If I could type, this would be really easy. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm just doing a basic Nmap scan. Now, when this runs, it's going to detect a number of ports. And we can see here that 3389 is listening, that the 5555 that I created. I think I also had some other stuff going on this box. So we can see that there are some ports there. Really cool. No big deal. Now, notice that nothing has actually really happened, right? We haven't actually seen any kind of alert or anything along that. Oh, now we did. So what I've got is a shell script that periodically checks for half-open connections. Now, because of the speed at which half-open connections disappear on the system, I can only run this thing about once every minute. So basically, an attacker did a SYN scan. The way that I did that Nmap scan is a SYN scan. I send a SYN, I get a SYNAC, and then I respond with a reset. So I was able to detect that fairly quickly because nobody should be interacting with these ports on this system. Guess what? I've just detected the bad guy. But we're not going to finish there. Now, one of the things that I intend on doing with this tool set, I don't have this built yet, is to generate fake network traffic. So if you remember before, one of the things that I set up was Telnet. And you can see that port 23 is open. And so cool, we got telnet. So one of the things that I'm going to do is create another script that will allow me to replay telnet traffic. And again, telnet is an insecure protocol that involves sending credentials, among other things, in clear text. So I created the user of Kevin with the password of password. It didn't really matter what that password was, because the intent is I can replay network traffic. So if the bad guys start sniffing network traffic, they could see that telnet communication and identify it. So let's go ahead and assume that that happened. And I'm going to go to 10, the same system, 25. I'm going to go ahead and use the username of Kevin and the password of password. And now I'm on, right? Now I'm in this network. So if I was to do like an ls, right? Oh my gosh, I logged into Kevin's thing and now I get something that says cool shell. And if I do an ls-l, you could see that the permissions right down here, you can see that it's an SUID file that is owned by root. Awesome. I'm an attacker. I just got lucky. I'm going to elevate my privileges. So I'm going to run cool underscore, whoopsie. Again, that typing thing always gets in my way. So cool shell, I go run that. And what ends up happening is it just pops up this message because I didn't do anything weird or crazy to this thing. But if I go over here and I do something like cat var log syslog and I grep for Deceptive, what we end up is we see this message right there, which says that SUID 0 was actually executed. So we actually see that execution happening as we go through there. So again, like I said, some cool thing. I just kind of wanted to give you guys a general idea as to how this deception can actually work. Now, the intent for this ultimately is that I want to take all of this data, feed it into like Elastic Stack, create some custom dashboards and all that kind of fun stuff. But the idea is what I'm doing is I'm creating traps for the bad guy. I'm creating a situation where the bad guy, because my system is maybe more vulnerable or I generate some network traffic or whatever, that the bad guy interacts with my system, which allows me to do a variety of things. First and foremost, it allows me to detect the bad guy as quickly as possible. And then after I detect the bad guy, it also allows me to understand something of the behavior. Now, what I did just here was very, very simplistic. Right? I just added a couple of files and a couple of this. And like I didn't do anything fancy at all. But if I was implementing this in a production environment, what I would do is I would, for example, I created a user, Kevin. Well, what I would do is I would fully flesh out that Kevin user's profile. I would put some files and stuff in their downloads, their My Documents, documents, directory, whatever. So I'm going to create what looks to be a real user called Kevin. Now, I can go through and identify a legitimate actual user on my network. I can copy their stuff over to here. I could modify the files so that they don't contain any sensitive data. And it allows me to understand not just that a bad guy is on my network, but it allows me to understand what the behavior of the bad guy is. So pretty cool stuff that we can go ahead and do. Now, at this point in time, you may be kind of going, well, hey, Kevin, great. That was cool. I hope you thought that was kind of cool. But what about the log4 shell stuff? So if we look over here, you'll notice that there's a bunch of windows open in my Linux box. On the top right, there is a tool. I'll actually show you the web interface, this Huntress Log4 Shell Vulnerability Tester. This is just a tool. And again, this is not built in living off the land, but I'm extending that concept here. So this tool, Huntress Labs Log4 Shell Tester, it basically creates a website and an LDAP server that is designed to receive Log4 shell requests. So this is basically playing the role of the bad guy's LDAP server that is going to feed back some code. Now, this one's actually not feeding back any code. All it's doing, oopsie, it seems like I have a bit of a problem with my thing. It looks like something failed. So I think when I ran that, it failed. So no worries there. I can go ahead and get this thing restarted really quick. And you'll actually see what was required to do that. I'm just going to shut down, oopsie, I'm going to shut down these terminal windows. just to make sure that everything is cleared out so that we don't end up with anything stepping on anybody else's toes. And I have my super handy dandy cheat sheet because I definitely don't remember all of this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a terminal window and kind of show you how I can set this up with a little bit of copy and paste just to make this as quick as possible. So, oopsie, come on, we can do this. Okay, so I'm just going to start this Redis server, which is required for my Log4 shell testing environment. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, this whole thing here is just the Java command to set up that Log4 shell server and the LDAP server and all of that kind of fun stuff that needs to be set up. So that part is now set up. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new window. So if I go here, this is this Log4 shell vulnerable app. It's just one that I found online. If I go into the directory, I can run. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and run that guy. And provided that that works properly. All right, that thing's doing what it's supposed to do. So that piece that I just started up is the actual vulnerable web application. I believe it's just like a weird modified version of a vulnerable Minecraft server. I didn't create that though. So now we have our server set up. If I go over to my web browser again, and I'm just going to go to port 8000, which happens to be the one that it's running on. All right. And then I'm going to go to the results page here. Now, if we go to the results page, you're going to see this JNDI code right there, which is what I want to grab. This is kind of a testing code just to kind of illustrate what's going on. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to drop that right into the curl command that I'm going to go ahead and use for testing purposes. Now, when I go over here, I'm going to copy this guy and I'm going to go over here and get rid of the predefined one because I was trying to get my ducks in a row ahead of time. And if I just paste this one in and I run this curl command, okay? So that curl command is just connecting up to the vulnerable application, submitting up the JNDI code. Now, if I go over here and I reload this page, we get an alert. So I end up seeing that somebody attempted to attack Log4 shell on a vulnerable application. So the idea when we combine this concept with deception is on my network, whether it's my network perimeter or on my internal network, I can set up fake, deceptive web applications that are vulnerable to Log4 shell. And what I'm doing is I'm looking to find out if anybody's looking for the vulnerability, if anybody's scanning me. Now, if I put this on the outside, if it's publicly accessible, you're probably going to get a lot of noise. So again, not ideal. But what I could do is I could place this on web applications on my internal network. So if the bad guy does gain any kind of foothold and they start looking for Log4 shell vulnerabilities, I instantly identify that those Log4 shell vulnerabilities have been attempted to be accessed. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to set traps based on an understanding of user behavior, right? So cool stuff. So again, what ends up happening is, so now that we get our deception set up, bad guy gets on the network, they get some foothold somehow, some way. Bad guys' activities are varied, right? If you're not a highly skilled or highly stealthy bad guy, you might just start port scanning the entire network. And we've already shown how we can detect if somebody port scans my system using deception. You might also sniff network traffic, right? You might go through and say, all right, I'm not going to go scan. That's noisy. What I'm going to do is maybe I will do a switching infrastructure attack, like an ARP cache poisoning attack or an attack against spanning tree or, a cam flooding type of an attack, something along those lines, get access to network packets, identify who's talking to whom, and then use that to launch my attack. Well, I can generate fake network traffic with fake credentials that point to a fake system, kind of like we showed in the little demo that we did. Now, if I get access to a system One of the things that attackers are commonly going to do is dump and crack passwords. Well, we saw in my little demo that I created fake users with crackable passwords. If anybody uses any of those credentials at any time, I can get an alert of that as well. And then, of course, if I'm a bad guy, I'm going to go looking for interesting things. I'm going to go look for those set UID root owned by root executables. I'm going to look for the ever-present passwords.txt files. I'm going to look for the secret sauce. I'm going to look for the top secret information. And if I plant fake stuff out there, the fact of the matter is I can catch the bad guys. So again, we kind of walk through the whole interaction stuff there, kind of a little demonstration. And then from a Log4 shell perspective, the same thing applies. We absolutely should be patching Log4 shell. We should be patching every vulnerability that we can. We should be doing everything we can to keep the bad guys off our network. But if that's where our focus stops, then Log4 shell is terrifying, because there are too many variations. There's too many possibilities of Log4j being in places on my network that I don't even know about. But if I take a different approach and say, all right, well, if I'm concerned about people getting on my network and trying to compromise Log4 shell, what if I gave them some things to compromise? If I give them things to compromise, and they do, I not only detect them, but I know something about their behavior. I know what they're looking for. Now, obviously, the scenario that I gave, everything that I did was very, very rudimentary. It was not fancy. It wasn't really planned out in any kind of real way. It was just the basics. But in all honesty, setting up the basics can absolutely help you detect bad guys more readily, more quickly, and more reliably than most of the detection technology we have available to us today. And oh, by the way, when we talk about cyber deception, you're not stuck with using some knucklehead shell scripts that he coded up over the last month. What you can do, I mean, there are commercial solutions, things like that out there as well, that you can go ahead and apply some of this stuff to. So the idea is, when I detect the bad guy on my network, if the bad guy is interacting with my deceptive resources, I can watch what they do, gain a better understanding, collect really valuable threat intelligence, maybe even attack attribution information. And if they start interacting with production resources, I can respond in a different way, kick them off the network or redirect them someplace else, all of that kind of stuff. So the fact of the matter is, protection by itself is not enough. Detection that focuses on looking for evil is not sufficient. And anomaly detection, broadly defined, is really, really difficult. But if we implement cyber deception and we plant traps for the attackers, going on the assumption that they're probably going to get into our network in the first place, the fact of the matter is that this approach can absolutely help with concerns about Log4 shell, but it can also help with concerns about the next vulnerability and the next one and the next one and the 100,000 other vulnerabilities after that. Because the fact of the matter is, a bad guy gets on my network, they have no way of determining what's real and what's fake. It is often said that defenders need to be right 100% of the time and attackers only need to be right once. Now, we can have a conversation about whether that's factually correct, but the sentiment absolutely is. Mistakes on the part of attackers don't really cost them all that much. Mistakes on the part of defenders can be very, very costly. With this type of scenario, when we implement deception technologies, deceptive systems, deception in general, it creates a situation where the bad guys now have to avoid 100% of my deceptive controls. In other words, the attacker now needs to be right 100% of the time, while the defenders only need to be right once. It changes the paradigm, and it truly will allow us to take back the advantage, to gain a significant and measurable advantage over the attackers. All right, so got about 22 more minutes. I will happily answer any questions that anybody has. I also dropped on my contact information. So if you want to follow up or have a conversation or ask any questions or whatever, that stuff is available. I will shameless plug here. Definitely take a look at the Security 550 class. If this type of topic interests you, then Security 550 talks about all of these things and more. Really cool stuff. Is the deception script that I use public? Not yet. This is literally a project that I started around Christmas time. So I've only been working on it off and on for about a month, and it's not ready for prime time yet. Do I need some hands-on help developing it? Yes. So yes. And so please shoot me an email. I am not a good shell scripter. This is the very first project that I have ever done trying to do shell scripting. So yeah, if this sounds cool, absolutely. So please shoot me a note. I would love to get some help because I need it desperately. How is the deception project different than a honeypot? I am so glad you asked that question. That is my favorite question that people ask. So how is deception different than a honeypot? Well, in all honesty, the way that I described it here, it's really not that much different. That said, what I did was I scratched the surface of deception. Let me explain why deception is different than a honeypot by this. If you look at military deception throughout history, and deception has been a part of military operations since, a few thousand years ago at least, right? So there was a quote by, I think it was Lieutenant General Strangeways. Strangeways is his last name. I forget what it's like. He was part of the British military, and I'm paraphrasing his quote, but he basically said, deception is not about trying to get an enemy to think something. It's trying to get an enemy to do something. So part of what the class that I wrote focuses on is, so with all of this, one of the questions you need to ask yourself when you implement deception is, what do I want the attacker to do? So if you think about it, my goal might be to detect the bad guys. So in order to detect the bad guys, I need to think about what it is that I need the attacker to do. I need the attacker to interact with that system on that port. So then I need to think about, well, what is going to convince the attacker to interact with that system on that port? And so I've got to have an understanding of attacker mindsets and capabilities and tools and utilities, because then I'm going to go, all right, if I was an attacker, what would cause me to go to that system on that port, whatever one I specify? And as I go through this, I then have to say, okay, well, how do I communicate the information to the attacker necessary to entice them to make the decision that I want? And actually, I apologize. Let me go over here. I forgot to flip my thing back. So I said I had contact information. I didn't put it up there. Here it is. I apologize for that. That was my bad. So the concept is, understand what you want the attacker to do, understand how you can manipulate the attacker to do that, and then try to look at what are the channels of communication between you and the attacker that can influence the attacker's activities. So if you think about this, it's kind of like a honeypot is just a component of deception. But we've got the real key and the real difference between deception, cyber deception, and a honeypot boils down to a lot of planning, right? If I was doing this in a production environment, I'm going to identify all of my key resources. I'm going to identify who my expected attacker is. I'm going to try to figure out what I want the attacker to do, how I can convince them to do it, through what channels, and build all of that stuff out using honeypot-like technology. So honeypots are a component of deception, but deception is more than that, because our goal with deception is to manipulate attackers' actions. It's to manipulate their behavior without them being aware of being manipulated. And so it might be splitting hairs, but the fact of the matter is that deception is a really planned and well-executed, thoughtful, and intentioned use of honeypots and similar technologies, if that makes sense. When is the first Sec 550 course planned? Give me 1 second and I will give you the exact date. I don't know if this is live on the website yet, but oopsie, we're looking at, I want to say it's April 25th. So April 25th is going to be the first beta version. Keep your eyes peeled because you do get discounts for a beta version of a class there as well. So cool. I'm looking on here, seeing if there was any other questions, any follow-up stuff. I am more than happy to answer any of those types of things. Oh, let me scroll down. Hold on. What is your opinion on commercial deception tools? Anything you tested and found useful yet? Okay. So I have contacts. I have regular conversations with, I would say, the majority of deception vendors. In fact, SANS is doing effectively like a dry run of my deception class in a couple of weeks, kind of invite only industry experts. I have a bunch of deception vendor representatives that are going to be in my class. I will say this. I absolutely love just about every commercial deception technology that I have seen. But I want to caution you that they are not all the same. They're all really good, but you can take an example like, you can go buy a cyber deception technology, a commercial solution that's going to cost you around $1,000, and you can have the thing set up in 5 minutes. And it reports up to a cloud-based interface. You can also buy commercial deception solutions that plug into trunk ports and spin up these honeypot type things in real time based on traffic that's flowing through trunk ports with enterprise monitoring and all kinds of cool stuff and everything in between. So my suggestion when it comes to any kind of commercial solution, I really like the ones that are out there. There's a lot of different approaches. Some of them focus more on the collection of threat intelligence, some of them more on detecting bad guys, some of them more on host-based intrusions. There's all kinds of cool ones. I don't want to highlight any just because it wouldn't be fair to the ones that I forgot about, but I will tell you, just about every deception technology vendor that I cannot think of one that I've had interactions with that doesn't have a really quality product. And if you think about this, this is not new, right? Honeypots have been around for decades, and deception as a concept has been around for thousands of years. We're just finally packaging it up together in a way that is going to be useful and more effective than it ever has been. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of playing around with this. Once I get my little free, eventually I'll get my little shell script stuff and they will be available. And that would be a nice option to play around with deception, get your feet wet, so to speak. Understand what it does. It's not, at least right now, designed to be any kind of commercial enterprise solution, but it is designed to be a lab that you can play around with, and you could put it up in a production environment and it will still work pretty well. I kind of look at what I'm putting together kind of like the way that I used to talk to people about IDS. I used to tell people to go out and get a copy of Snort or Suricata, play around with a free IDS so that you understand what you want your IDS to do, what capabilities are important to you, that kind of stuff. And then you can go look for a commercial solution. So maybe that will be an option once I can get my my tool put together. But like I said, I've only been playing with this thing for about a month now, so it's definitely not ready for prime time. Any other questions? I know that we've got a few more minutes left in our allocated time. If anybody has any other questions, please do not hesitate to ask. If you don't want to, ask questions in this format, but you want to reach out to me separately, hopefully you are seeing my contact information now. kfiskus@sans.org is my email address, or one of my email addresses. I run a couple of companies. There's a link for the course, and I also have a YouTube channel that for a while I was updating on a weekly basis, and then I had a child, and that was a year and a half ago, and haven't really done a lot of updates recently. But on that YouTube channel, there's most recent updates there is actually an overview of the class that I put together, as well as a lot of interviews with deception technology vendors and all that kind of stuff. So if you find that useful, awesome. I hope that you do. All right, let me just see. Okay. are the class working with open source deception tooling? Are these ready for enterprise? So yeah, so the class that I'm putting together is not focusing at all on commercial solutions. On the 5th day of class, we provide a brief overview of some of the commercial solutions, but everything that we do in the class is open source, freely available tools. Some of it's built in, some of it's just free deception tools that are out there. Yes, there's lots and lots of labs in the class. Generally speaking, each day of class is divided up into 4 sections. We talk about a topic for about an hour, and then we have about a half hour of labs. Then we do another topic for an hour, half hour of labs. And then the day 6 is a big capture the flag exercise. So it is, I forget what the breakdown in terms of hours of lab versus hours of lecture, but it's about 45 minutes of labs for every hour of lecture, maybe a little bit more than that. Now, in terms of the other thing I will focus on talk about with respect to that class and answer that question, Michael, is the class isn't really a tools dump. It's not designed to be, here's a bunch of tools. What it's designed to do is that aspect of how do you manipulate an attacker into doing what you want it to do? So there's a lot of discussions of how you can implement deception using whatever tool set you happen to want to use, whether you use built-in tools, whether you use open source freely available deception tools, whether you use commercial tools. The class is going to provide you with the capability of doing deception planning with any tool set you want. We use a bunch of tools in this class, and they could be used in an enterprise environment if you wanted to, or you can go look at commercial solutions should you want to do that as well. Cool. Any other questions? I know that it is 4:30, so we're probably going to have to shut it down pretty soon. But if anybody has any other questions or, like I said, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, thank you guys so much. I'll be honest, going through a demo, always a live demo with technology that I'm actually actively working on as we speak is always a terrifying prospect. Fortunately, nothing blew up on me totally badly. So that's cool. Makes sense. Is there already a second run for Sec 550 planned? Likely not going to make the first. I know that there's going to be a second run of it. I just got to look and see if, yeah, it looks like June 20th. The week of June 20th is at least currently the second run. That is subject to change. We'll see. But June 20th would be the second run of that as well. So that's kind of where we stand. Awesome. Thank you guys for appreciating. Awesome. And like I said, there hopefully will be more runs of that class moving forward. So if schedules don't work out, there should be an on-demand option if people are interested in that. So it should be pretty cool. So awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. I hope that you found this at least somewhat valuable. I'm not sure what your expectations were with respect to Log4 Shell or Log4j doesn't scare me, but hopefully I provided you with something that you can take back and start to look at. And again, if you want any follow-up information or that kind of stuff, please don't hesitate to reach out. Email is great. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. So if you want to reach out there, all that stuff is awesome. So guys, thank you so much. It has been an awesome time. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and so that's it. I will pass the MC duties back over to Carol.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.